My son thought the ranch money would make him powerful, but the moment he crossed my kitchen floor that night, he forgot one thing. I had raised him in a house with cameras, contracts, and a husband who never trusted greed. He was 72 years old, standing beside the same oak table where I used to pack Travis peanut butter sandwiches before school, when he demanded the money from the sale of Whitaker Creek Ranch. The check had cleared that morning. 41 years of drought Texas summers, patched fences, calving seasons, hail-damaged roofs, and mornings when Harold and I rose before sunrise had been reduced to numbers in a bank account. Travis looked at those numbers and saw a rescue rope. Brooke, my daughter-in-law, saw lifestyle. He saw the last piece of my husband's promise to me. Mom, don't make this ugly, Travis said, his voice low, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the folder I had not invited him to touch. Brooke stood near the pantry door in a cream sweater that probably cost more than my first pickup truck, her arms folded, her expression calm in the way polished people look calm when someone else is doing their dirty work. You're too old to manage that kind of money alone, Eleanor, she said. She had stopped calling me Mom years ago, but that night the sound of my name in her mouth felt colder than usual. I kept one hand on the back of the chair and the other on the folder holding my bank instructions, closing documents, and a letter from Calvin Brooks, Harold's sole attorney. The money is not being transferred to Travis, I said. It is staying exactly where Harold and I planned for it to stay. For a few seconds, the kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the rooster clock above the stove. Travis stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. You sold my inheritance, he said. No, I answered. I sold my ranch. His face changed then. Not all at once. Just enough for me to understand that the boy who once cried when a barn cat disappeared had grown into a man who believed my survival was standing in the way of his comfort. I reached for the folder. He pulled it back. The chair scraped. Glass tipped over. The old table shook hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. A moment later, I was holding a dish towel to my face, tasting copper, staring at my son through eyes that had finally stopped making excuses for him. Brooke did not rush toward me. She did not ask if I needed help. She glanced at the hallway, then at Travis, and said, "We should go before she turns this into something dramatic." That was the sentence that finished what his anger had started. Not the pain. Not the shock. Her inconvenience. My injury was an inconvenience. Travis stood frozen for half a breath, looking younger than 43 and uglier than I had ever seen him. Mum, he said, but the word arrived too late to mean anything. He lowered the towel just enough to speak clearly. You should leave now. It waited for me to cry. Brooke waited for me to beg. Neither of them understood that something inside me had gone very still, the way the ranch used to go still before a thunderstorm rolled over the hills. They walked out through the back door, leaving muddy prints on the floor Harold had refinished with his own hands. He locked the door behind them. Then I stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked up at the tiny black camera above the pantry, the one Travis had laughed at 3 weeks earlier and called paranoid. It had been recording the whole time. 6 weeks before that night, Whitaker Creek Ranch still smelled like cedar dust, horse feed, and the kind of morning air you only get in the Texas Hill Country before the heat settles in. I had lived there for 41 years, long enough to know which fence posts leaned after heavy rain, which stretch of gravel washed out every spring, and which window in the kitchen caught the first gold line of sunrise. Harold bought the land when we were young enough to believe hard work could fix anything. Back then, the ranch was not much more than 90 acres of stubborn grass, a sagging barn, and a white farmhouse with plumbing that complained in the winter. We built the rest slowly. One paycheck, one repair, one season at a time. Travis learned to ride his first pony in the south pasture. A lost his first tooth on the porch steps. A carved his initials into the old feed-room door when he was 10, and Harold pretended to be angry, though I saw him smiling later when he thought no one was looking. After Harold passed 4 years ago, I tried to keep everything exactly as he left it. I paid the property taxes, called the farrier, hired help for the heavier work, and walked the fence line with a walking stick when my niece started arguing with me. But land does not soften just because a woman gets older. The gate still had to be lifted when it dragged. The pump still froze when the temperature dropped below 32 degrees. The barn roof still needed patching after every bad storm. Breathe can keep you standing for a long time, but it cannot climb a ladder for you. The decision to sell did not come in one dramatic moment. It came quietly, in small humiliations. A water trough I could not move. A feed bag I could not lift. A morning when I stood in the driveway with Harold's gloves in my hands and realized I was preserving a life that no longer had both of us in it. He cried that day, but not loudly. He sat on the tailgate of the old Ford and let the wind dry my face before anyone could see. When I finally told Travis I was listing the ranch, he went silent on the phone. Then he said all the right things. Maybe it is time, Mom. You deserve something easier. Dad would understand. For one foolish hour, I believed him. Brooke started texting me the next morning. She sent listings for cottages near Fredericksburg, articles about retirement planning, even a picture of a porch swing with the message, "This looks like you, Eleanor." It was the kindest she had been in years, and that should have warned me. Kindness that arrives right after money is mentioned often has a hook buried inside it. Within a week, Travis was calling every other day. He wanted to know the asking price, the buyer's name, the closing date, whether the payment would be wired or issued by cashier's check. Brooke began using phrases like family security and generational planning. He wrote each phrase down in a yellow legal pad Harold used to keep by the phone. At first, I told myself I was being unfair. A mother should not suspect her own son just because he asks questions. But then Travis asked which bank I used, and Brooke suggested I add him as a signer in case of emergencies. That was when I heard Harold's voice in my memory as clearly as if he were standing beside the stove, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Eji, do not ever confuse pressure with love. So I called Calvin Brooks in San Antonio, the attorney Harold had trusted for 30 years, and I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. Calvin Brooks' office sat on the second floor of a brick building in San Antonio, above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon rolls and strong coffee. I remember that detail because I had not eaten breakfast that morning, and my hands were shaking badly enough that I kept them folded in my lap during the elevator ride. Calvin was 78, with silver hair, careful eyes, and the kind of patience only small-town attorneys and old ranchers seem to have left. He had handled our wills, the land purchase beside the creek, Harold's medical paperwork, and every legal headache that came with a life built on property lines and handshake promises. When his receptionist showed me in, he stood slowly and came around the desk instead of reaching across it. "Eleanor," he said, taking both my hands, "I was hoping you would come before closing." That sentence settled in my stomach like a stone. I sat in the leather chair across from him while he opened a thick file with Harold's name on the tab. For several minutes, he did not mention Travis or Brooke. He asked about my niece, the farmhouse roof, whether I had found a place in Fredericksburg, whether I was sleeping. People who ask ordinary questions before hard ones usually know the hard ones are coming. Finally, he removed a document from the folder and placed it between us. "Harold updated the trust 3 months before he passed," he said. "He did not want to worry you while he was sick, but he wanted safeguards in place." He looked down at the page, at language too clean and formal for something that suddenly felt so personal. Calvin explained it gently. Harold had arranged the remaining estate so that I had full control. During my lifetime. Not Travis. Not any future spouse Travis might have. Not the family committee. Me. If anyone tried to pressure me into signing over assets, gaining access to accounts, changing beneficiaries, or using guilt to interfere with my independence, Calvin had authority to step in if a beneficiary threatened, coerced, or financially exploited me. That person could lose any remaining claim connected to Harold's estate. He stared at the paper until the words blurred. He thought Travis might do that. He asked. Calvin looked out the window for a moment, toward the traffic moving slowly below. Harold loved his son, he said. But love did not make him blind. He felt embarrassed then, as if my husband had seen something in our child that I had spent years politely refusing to notice. Calvin must have read it on my face because he leaned forward and lowered his voice. Protection is not betrayal, Eleanor. Sometimes it is the last form of love a person can leave behind. He pressed my fingertips against the edge of the desk and nodded, though something in me ached with every movement. That afternoon, we reviewed everything. The bank instructions. The closing transfer. The beneficiary updates. They contact restrictions if Travis or Brooke attempted to involve themselves. Calvin suggested a separate account, one Travis did not know about, and a written record of every conversation related to the ranch money. Dates, times, exact words if you remember them, he said. Not because you expect trouble. Because if trouble comes, memory should not have to stand alone. Before I left, he asked whether I had security cameras at the farmhouse. He almost laughed. Harold had installed them after a neighbor lost equipment from his barn years earlier. Most of them were old, but the kitchen camera still worked because Travis had helped replace it 3 weeks before, complaining the whole time that I was acting paranoid. He drove home with Calvin's folder on the passenger seat in the late afternoon sun burning orange over the highway. By the time I turned through the ranch gate, I understood something I had not allowed myself to admit before. Brooke was not just being helpful. Travis was not just anxious. They were circling the sale like coyotes near a weak fence, waiting to see where I would give way. The days between my meeting with Calvin and the closing moved slowly, but Travis and Brooke seemed to grow more impatient by the hour. Every conversation became a careful little test. Travis would call in the evening, pretending to ask whether I had eaten dinner, and within 3 minutes he would be asking about the wire transfer. Brooke sent me a link to a financial planner in Austin and wrote, "He works with families who want to protect wealth across generations." He looked at the word families for a long time. It sounded warm, but she used it like a lock she wanted to place around my hands. I started keeping Harold's yellow legal pad beside the kitchen phone. On Monday, Travis asked whether the money would be available immediately after closing. He wrote it down. On Tuesday, Brooke suggested I move into a smaller place sooner because cash from the sale could disappear fast if you are not careful. He wrote that down too. On Wednesday, Travis stopped by unannounced and walked through the house as if measuring what else might be turned into money. He ran his fingers along the mantel Harold had built from reclaimed oak, glanced at the antique saddle in the hallway, and asked whether I planned to sell the tractor. "It still runs," I said. "So do you, Mum," he replied with a laugh that did not reach his eyes, "but that does not mean everything old is worth keeping." He smiled because I had learned that silence sometimes gives people enough rope to show you who they are. Brooke arrived 10 minutes later carrying 2 iced coffees, though she knew I had never liked sweet coffee drinks. She placed one in front of me anyway and opened her laptop at my kitchen table without asking. "I made a simple plan," she said. Simple, in Brooke's language, meant she had already decided. She showed me a spreadsheet with colored boxes and neat categories. Mortgage relief for Travis and Brooke. Private school fund for their daughter, Madison. Credit card consolidation. New vehicle down payment. Investment account under Travis management. At the bottom, in a narrow line, she had written, Eleanor monthly allowance. He stared at those 3 words until the kitchen seemed to tilt. My own money, from my own land, reduced to an allowance beneath Brooke's manicure. "This is not a family account," I said. "This is my retirement." Brooke's smile tightened. "Of course. But at your age, peace of mind matters more than control." There it was again, dressed up as concern. Peace, meaning surrender. Control, meaning dignity. Travis leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead like I was the difficult one. "Mom, nobody is trying to take anything from you. We are trying to make sure that work stays in the family." He looked past him, through the kitchen window, toward the south pasture where Harold had spent 3 summers rebuilding a fence line after a flood. "Your father's work kept a roof over my head," I said. "It was never meant to become your emergency fund." The air changed. Travis closed the laptop a little too hard. Brooke's eyes went flat and careful. For the first time, they understood I was not confused. He was not overwhelmed. He was not waiting for one of them to explain my life to me. After they left, I wiped the table slowly, though it was already clean. Then I took a picture of Brooke's spreadsheet with my phone and sent it to Calvin. He called 5 minutes later. "Do not argue with them alone if you can avoid it," he said. "And keep the camera on." He looked up at the little black lens above the pantry. Its red light blinked once, steady and patient. Harold used to say a good fence does not start a fight. It just makes clear where the line is. That night, I finally understood why he had built so many. Closing day came on a Thursday, bright and dry, with a clean blue Texas sky that made everything look kinder than it felt. He drove to the title office in Kerrville wearing Harold's favorite navy dress and the small pearl earrings he had given me on our 35th anniversary. He wanted to look steady. He wanted to look like a woman making a decision, not a widow being carried along by circumstance. The buyers were a young couple from Austin with 2 children and big plans for chickens, horses, and weekend breakfasts on the porch. The wife cried when I handed her the old brass key. He almost did too, but I held it in some goodbyes deserve privacy. When the final papers were signed, the title officer shook my hand and said the funds would be wired that afternoon. Just like that, Whitaker Creek Ranch no longer belonged to me. 90 acres, 1 farmhouse, 2 barns, a creek that ran shallow in August, and every ordinary miracle Harold and I had built together had become a transaction in a quiet room with beige walls and a bowl of peppermints on the table. He sat in my truck afterward for nearly 20 minutes, both hands on the steering wheel, looking at nothing. My phone buzzed before I even started the engine. Travis. Everything go okay? He asked. Not how are you holding up? Not I know this must be hard. Just whether everything had gone okay, as if you were tracking a delivery. It is done, I said. There was a pause, then a breath of excitement he tried to hide. So when does the money hit? He looked through the windshield at a live oak tree bending slightly in the wind. Soon. Great, he said. Brooke and I will come by tonight. We should talk through next steps. Next steps. It made my life sound like a project he had been assigned to manage. He told him I was tired, but they came anyway. By 6:30, Brooke was at my door holding flowers from the grocery store and a white gift bag with gold tissue paper. Travis carried a bottle of sparkling cider and smiled too widely. Tomorrow's new chapter, Brooke said, setting everything on the kitchen counter as if she were hosting in my house. Inside the bag was a porch candle and a framed print that said, "Home is wherever family gathers." He thanked her because my mother raised me to be polite, even when politeness is the last thin blanket over disappointment. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where her spreadsheet had humiliated me 2 days earlier. Brooke pulled out a fresh folder. Travis folded his hands and gave me the careful expression men use when they think sounding calm makes them right. We are not here to pressure you, he said. We just need clarity. Brooke slid papers across the table. The summaries. A mortgage statement. A car estimate. Tuition brochures for Madison School. A printed page about investment opportunities Travis had circled in blue ink. He did not touch any of it. This is not clarity, I said. This is a shopping list. Travis' mouth tightened. Brooke's voice stayed smooth. Eleanor, nobody expects you to pay for everything. But after selling land that was part of the family for decades, it is reasonable to discuss how the family benefits. He folded my hands on the table and felt the old wood beneath my skin, scarred by years of meals, homework, tax receipts, and birthday cakes. Harold and I paid the bank for this ranch. Harold and I paid the taxes. Harold and I fixed the roof, the fences, the pump, and the barn. The family benefited for 41 years. Now this money will take care of me. Travis looked away first. Brooke looked at him, then back at me, and I saw the calculation pass between them like a whispered language. Maybe we should continue this tomorrow, she said. When emotions are less raw. He nodded. That would be best. But as they stood to leave, Travis stopped beside the doorway and looked back at the kitchen, at the cabinets, at the clock, at me. His voice came out soft, almost wounded. Dad would not have shut me out like this. He let the sentence hang there until it lost its disguise. Then I answered quietly, your father is the reason you cannot force your way in. Brooke's hand closed around Travis' arm. For the first time that evening, her smile disappeared. The next evening, the rain came in hard from the west, tapping against the kitchen windows and turning the long driveway into a ribbon of mud. I had spent the day packing small things I wanted to take to Fredericksburg, Harold's pocketknife, the framed photograph of us at the county fair, my recipe box, the blue ceramic bowl Travis made in 3rd grade with one side higher than the other. He wrapped each item in newspaper and placed it in a cardboard box labeled living room, though I knew some things would never belong to a room again. Around 7:15, headlights swept across the curtains. He did not have to look through the window to know who it was. Travis never knocked the same way twice, but that night he knocked like a man who had decided a door was only a suggestion. Broke stood behind him under a black umbrella, her hair tucked neatly beneath her hood, one hand pressed to her phone as if she had somewhere better to be. He opened the door only halfway. "This is not a good time," I said. Travis' face was pale with anger or worry, maybe both. "We need to talk now." He stepped aside because part of me was still his mother, and mothers are slow to accept when the child at the door has not come home for comfort. I walked straight to the kitchen. Broke followed, staying near the pantry, her eyes moving once toward the little camera and then away again. Travis placed both hands on the back of a chair and leaned forward. "I am in trouble," he said. The words came out flat, stripped of pride. "The house payment is behind. The credit cards are maxed. The business loan I took last year has a personal guarantee. If I do not come up with money soon, everything collapses." For one moment, I saw the frightened boy under the grown man, and it hurt more than I expected. "Bring me the real statements," I said. "I will have Calvin review them. If there is a legitimate bill, I can pay the lender directly. He will not hand you a blank check." Broke gave a small laugh, not loud, just sharp enough to cut the room. "Do you hear yourself? Your son is asking for help, and you are treating him like a stranger off the street." He looked at her. "A stranger off the street would not ask to be added to my bank account." Travis stood upright. "This is not about Brooke." "Then stop letting her speak for you." The refrigerator hummed. Rain pushed against the glass. Travis' eyes filled with something ugly and wounded, the kind of emotion that looks like pain until it starts searching for someone to punish. "I gave up years of my life for this place," he said. "Every summer, every weekend, Dad had me working fences while other kids went to the lake. You owe me." He shook my head slowly. "Your father taught you responsibility. That is not a debt I am required to repay in gas." I reached for the folder on the table, the one Calvin had told me not to leave at, and I placed my hand over it. "No," his voice rose. "You are choosing paperwork over your own blood. I am choosing safety." The next few seconds blurred into sound and movement rather than images. A chair shifted. The folder slid. The glass of water near my elbow tipped and rolled across the table. He stepped back too quickly and caught myself against the edge of the counter, stunned by how fast the room had changed. The dish towel was in my hand before I remembered picking it up. Travis froze, breathing hard, staring at me as if he had just awakened in the middle of his own worst decision. Broke did not move toward me. She looked at the hallway, then at the back door, then at her husband. "We need to go," she said. "No." Travis whispered, "Mom, I did not mean." I lifted one hand, not to comfort him, not to accuse him, only to stop the sentence before it could ask me to carry the weight of it. "Leave," I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Broke pulled the door open. Rain rushed in cold across the floor. Travis backed away from me like he finally understood there was a line in that kitchen he could not uncross. When the door shut behind them, I locked it, turned the deadbolt, and stood still until their headlights disappeared down the muddy drive. Then I looked up at the camera above the pantry. The red light blinked steadily, small and patient, like Harold himself had left one eye open over the room. Brooke Gallian's porch light came on 10 minutes after Travis and Brooke left, a small yellow square glowing through the rain beyond the kitchen window. Brooke had lived on the next property for 26 years, close enough to know when my cattle got loose, far enough to pretend she did not see me crying at Harold's funeral when I stepped behind the church. She must have seen the headlights, then the sudden silence, because my phone rang while I was still standing by the sink with the damp towel pressed carefully to my face. "Eleanor," she said, "do not tell me you are fine unless you want me to walk over there and prove you wrong." He almost laughed, but the sound caught somewhere in my throat. "I need a ride," I said. She was at my back door in less than 5 minutes wearing a raincoat over her nightgown and boots that did not match. Brooke did not ask too many questions at first. She looked at me once, looked at the floor, then looked at the folder still sitting on the table. Her mouth tightened in that old-fashioned way women have when they are holding back words for the sake of usefulness. "Get your purse," she said. "We are going to urgent care." The clinic in Kerrville was nearly empty, just a young father with a coughing child and an older man holding an ice pack to his wrist. The nurse asked what happened, and for one cowardly second, I heard myself say, "I slipped." Ruth turned her head toward me so slowly I felt 12 years old. The nurse did not argue. She only wrote something down, asked gentle questions, and checked me over with professional calm. He was grateful for that calm. He had no room left for pity. Under the bright exam room lights, everything felt too clean, too white, too public. I sat on the paper-covered table in Harold's navy cardigan, hands folded in my lap, while Ruth stood by the wall with her arms crossed. When the doctor finished, he spoke carefully, the way people do when they know there is more in a room than they are allowed to name. "You should rest tonight," he said. "And if you feel unsafe at home, you have options." Options. Such a small word for a door you never imagined needing. On the drive back, Ruth did not take the road to my ranch. She turned toward her house instead. "You are staying with me," she said. "Just for tonight." He did not argue. My body was tired, but my mind had become painfully clear. In Ruth's guest room, with a quilt folded at the foot of the bed and rain tapping softly against the window, I took out my phone and called Calvin. He answered on the second ring, though it was almost 10:30. "Eleanor?" He closed my eyes. "Calvin, it happened." There was no dramatic pause, no surprised question. Only the sound of a chair moving, then his voice, lower and steadier than before. "Is the recording still on the kitchen system?" "Yes." "Did you receive medical care?" "Yes." "Are you somewhere safe?" He looked toward the hallway, where Ruth was making tea as if tea could hold the world together. "Yes." Calvin exhaled once. Then we stopped waiting. After the call, I sat on the edge of Ruth's guest bed and forwarded him everything. The photo of Brooke's spreadsheet. The texts from Travis. The bank questions. The notes from Harold's yellow legal pad. My hands moved slowly, but they did not tremble. At 11:16, a message came from Travis. "Think carefully before you make this worse." He read it twice. Not because it frightened me, but because it proved something I had been too loving to accept. It was not sorry. It was afraid of consequences. He forwarded the message to Calvin without answering. Then I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the quilt beneath my hands. Each square had been stitched from old fabric, faded cotton turned into something useful and strong. I thought of Harold's trust, the camera above the pantry, the fence lines he had built, the warnings I had finally listened to. For the first time since selling the ranch, I slept without dreaming of gates left open. Calvin waited 3 days before contacting Travis. It wanted the bank records secured, the camera file copied, and my medical paperwork placed in a folder where no one could pretend it was emotion instead of evidence. During those 3 days, I stayed with Ruth and watched the rain clear from her back porch. She made coffee every morning at 6, fed her orange cat, and spoke to me only when something needed saying. That was one of the reasons I loved her. She did not try to decorate pain with cheerful words. On Monday afternoon, Calvin called Travis and Brooke into his office under the calm explanation that I was ready to discuss the structure of future financial decisions. It let them hear what they wanted to hear. Greedy people often walk faster when they think a door has opened. Brooke drove me to San Antonio because she said my hands still looked too tired for highway traffic. I wore a gray dress, low shoes, and Harold's wedding band on a chain. Beneath my collar. He also wore large sunglasses, not because I was ashamed, but because I had learned that some marks do not belong to the room until you choose to show them. When we arrived, Calvin's receptionist led me through a side hallway so I was already seated when Travis and Brooke walked in. Brooke came first, dressed in white, carrying a leather folder and a purse with gold hardware. Travis followed in a navy jacket, freshly shaved, trying to look like a man attending a business meeting instead of a son who had frightened his mother in her own kitchen. His eyes found me, then the chair beside Calvin, then the stack of documents on the table. "Ma'am," he said softly, as if softness could erase timing. He did not answer. Brooke glanced at Ruth, who had insisted on sitting beside me, and her expression flickered with annoyance. Calvin closed the door. "Thank you for coming," he said. "This meeting concerns Eleanor's assets, Harold Whittaker's trust, and the events of last Thursday evening." Travis shifted in his chair. Brooke's hand tightened around her folder. Calvin placed the first document on the table. "Before we discuss money, I need to make something clear. Eleanor is the sole decision-maker over the proceeds from the sale of Whittaker Creek Ranch. No one else has signing authority. No one else has management authority. Any attempt to pressure her into transferring funds is legally significant." Brooke gave a small, controlled smile. "Of course. We only wanted to help." Calvin did not look at her. He opened the laptop and turned the screen toward them. The kitchen appeared in grainy color, the rooster clock visible above the stove, the pantry door half in frame, the folder on the table. No one spoke while the recording played. He watched Travis watch himself. That was harder than watching the screen. Shame moved across his face, but it did not stay long enough to become repentance. Brooke looked away first. "That does not show the whole context," she said. Calvin paused the video at the exact moment her own voice came through clearly, telling Travis they needed to leave before I made things dramatic. The silence after that was different. I then laid out the rest: my notes, the spreadsheet, the text message warning me to think carefully, the clinic record, the trust clause Harold had signed 4 years earlier. Travis leaned forward, his voice cracking just enough to sound practiced. "Ma'am, please. We were scared. We are drowning. He made one mistake." He removed my sunglasses and looked at him without raising my voice. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is backing into a mailbox. What happened in my kitchen was a choice followed by a threat." Brooke turned toward him so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. "Travis, I told you not to go over there like that." There it was, the first gate swinging shut between them. Calvin continued. "Under Harold's trust, Travis was removed from any future benefit tied to the estate. It would have no access, no advisory role, no emergency authority, and no claim disguised as family need. If either of them contacted me about money again, Calvin would take the next legal step." Travis stared at me as if I had become the stranger. "You would really do this to your own son?" I folded my hands on the table, feeling the chain beneath my collar where Harold's ring rested against my heart. "No, Travis. You did this. I am only finally refusing to pay for it." After that meeting, I did not see Travis for a long time. I sent 3 messages in the first week, each one shorter than the last, moving from apology to blame to silence. Brooke sent nothing. Ruth heard from a friend in Kerrville that Brooke had taken Madison to stay with her sister in Austin, and that Travis was trying to sell his truck before the bank took it. He did not ask for details. There is a difference between consequences and revenge, and I had no interest in standing close enough to watch either one happen. Calvin handled everything that needed handling. My account stayed protected. My address changed. My phone stopped ringing at odd hours. By early fall, I moved into a small limestone cottage on the edge of Fredericksburg, 5 minutes from the grocery store and close enough to the library that I could walk there on cool mornings. The house had 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a front porch just wide enough for a rocking chair and 2 pots of rosemary. It was not Whittaker Creek Ranch. At first, that hurt every time I turned the key. There was no long gravel drive, no barn roof shining after rain, no pasture gate waiting for my hand. But there was also no weight pressing on my chest each morning, no pump to worry about, no fence line I could no longer walk, no son arriving with entitlement hidden behind family words. I hung Harold's hat on a peg by the door and placed our county fair photograph on the mantel. In the evenings, sunlight came through the front window and touched his face in the frame, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was failing him by choosing an easier life. I used part of the ranch money to start the Harold Whittaker Second Start Fund through Calvin's office and a local woman's nonprofit. It was not grand, and I did not put my picture on anything. The fund helped older women pay for legal consultations, emergency lodging, moving trucks, lock changes, and the first month of rent when family had become unsafe or financially cruel. The first thank you note came from a woman in Marble Falls who wrote that she had slept through the night for the first time in 8 months. I read that sentence at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling beside me, and I cried harder than I had cried at the title office. Not because I was sad. Because something broken had finally become useful. Winter settled gently that year. Brooke came by every Sunday after church with biscuits wrapped in foil and gossip she claimed she did not care about. Madison sent me a Christmas card drawn in crayon, just a little house, a tree, and the words "I miss you, Grandma Eleanor." He placed it on the refrigerator and stood there a long time. Children should not have to understand adult greed. He wrote back, telling her I loved her and that my door would always be open to her when she was older and could choose it freely. He never heard from Brooke. Travis called once in February from a number I did not recognize. It sounded tired. He said, "Ma'am, I have lost everything." He looked out at the rosemary bending in the wind and answered, "No, Travis. You lost what you tried to take. There is a difference." It was quiet for a long while. Then he asked if I hated him. He closed my eyes and saw him at 8 years old, running through the south pasture with Harold's hat too big on his head. "No," I said. "But love is not a gate you get to kick open whenever you need money." We ended the call without promises. Some stories do not close neatly. Some sons do not become good men just because their mothers suffer enough. He still missed the ranch. I missed the smell of hay in the barn and the sound of Harold's boots on the porch. But I do not miss the fear that came after people decided my age made me easy to move. My son wanted the money. Brooke wanted control. What they never understood was that Harold did not leave me land so I could be owned by it. He left me enough strength to build one final fence, lock it from the inside, and live in peace.